I had parked my truck halfway up the street in front of a row of brick houses that hadn't looked quite so close up in almost 12 years. Same cracked sidewalks. Same chain-link fences dividing tiny front patches of concrete and dead grass. Same corner bodega with faded beer signs in the window. But the street looked like somebody had started the day and then just stopped. A delivery van was sitting crooked in the middle of the road with the driver's door hanging open. A city bus farther down the street had its hazards blinking, but nobody got on or off. A shopping bag was lying torn open on the street near the curb. Oranges were rolling in the gutter like someone had dropped them mid-step and never come back. I killed the engine and sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel. I told myself I was just tired. That was easier to believe. The last 6 months, it seemed, had been a long, controlled slide. Divorce papers. A job that was just gone without warning. Moving back into the upstairs apartment over my aunt's old place, just because it was cheap and no one else wanted it. I'd spent most of the drive into the city, trying not to think about how a man could end up back on the same block he'd spent his whole life trying to leave. And then I looked up, and I saw a woman pounding on her own window from the inside. She was pounding, not tapping. Her hands were both flat, and she was hitting the window hard enough that the frame was shaking. I couldn't make out the words she was shouting, but I could see her face. Panic. Real panic. The kind of panic that leaves nothing else in a person. A man stumbled around the side of the abandoned delivery van. At first, I thought he was either drunk or hurt. His shirt was torn open at the shoulder, and it was covered in blood. He was moving stiffly, as if he had to jerk each step out of his legs. Another man, a construction vest and a gray hoodie, stepped out from the sidewalk, hands up. Hey, you okay? I was out of the truck before I decided I was getting out of the truck. The man with the bloodied shirt turned towards the sound of the man's voice. And then he lunged. But there was no hesitation in it. No confusion. No human pause. 1 second he was staggering. The next he was crossing the space between them in a motion, as if something had him on a wire. They hit the pavement hard. The man in the vest was screaming, trying to get him off of him. And I saw the bloody man's head dip twice fast and viciously at his throat. The whole block changed in an instant. Someone yelled from up the street. A car door slammed shut. The woman on the porch was pounding on the window of her house even harder. I stood there in a daze of a second or maybe 2, trying to get my brain to wrap itself around what I was seeing. He was fighting. He was drug psychotic. He was striking at random. But the screaming stopped as if it had been cut off with a knife. And the man who was attacking stood up. His mouth was red. That was it. That was the last of rational thinking. A young teenage girl ran out from between 2 parked cars on my side of the street, sobbing so hard she couldn't catch her breath. Behind her, an older man with a limp was trying to hurry after her, with one hand pressed against his rib cage. They were both heading in the direction of the attack without even seeing it. Not that way, I yelled. They both turned and looked at me. Here, I said, pointing at the narrow opening between 2 houses just to my right. Go through here. The girl did not argue. Fear decided for her. She ran towards me. The old man stumbled after her. I caught up to the girl and shoved her through the side passage. I caught up to the old man and hooked my arm around his back, half dragging him along with me. More voices were shouting from behind us. Running footsteps. Screaming. I reached the rear fence and located the latch by habit. Rusty chain-link fence, bent at the bottom, just like when I was a kid and cut through these yards to get home before dark. I shoved the girl through first, then the old man, then slammed the fence shut behind us and dropped the latch into place. Metal clanked on the other side right away. The 3 of us stepped back, breathing hard, in a small yard surrounded by fences, porches, and outbuildings. The girl was crying. The old man was repeating over and over, "What is happening? What is happening?" I looked over the fence tops to the street and saw movement flit in and out of sight in flashes between the fence slats. Not one. More than one. That was when I stopped thinking about one house. One locked door. One place to hide. The backyards through these houses joined up in a crooked line all the way to the next alley over. Fences. Gates. Porches. Sheds. Roofs. More than a place to hide. More than a place to seek cover. A path. Maybe more than a path. Maybe a way to hold this block without dying on it. For maybe 10 seconds, nobody spoke. The girl had backed herself against the rear wall of a garage, arms wrapped around her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together by force. She couldn't have been older than 16. The older man bent forward with both hands on his knees, dragging air into his lungs in short, shaky pulls. I stood by the gate, listening. The sounds from the street came in bursts. Running footsteps, a car horn blaring without stopping, someone yelling for help and someone else yelling to get back. Then another scream, shorter this time, cut off so fast it barely sounded human by the end. I looked around the yard automatically, not because I had a plan yet, but because looking at something practical felt better than letting panic take over. The fence behind us connected to the next yard through a warped wooden panel. The garage had a side door and a low roof. The back porch of the nearest house had a storm door hanging halfway open. Beyond the fence line, I could see the tops of 3 more yards stepping down toward the alley. Connected space, limited sight lines, more than one way out. The older man finally straightened. We need to get inside. Maybe, I said. The word slipped out before I could soften it. He stared at me. Maybe? If we pick the wrong house, we trap ourselves. The girl looked up for the first time. Mascara streaked down both cheeks. Trap ourselves from what? I started to answer, but metal clanged somewhere beyond the next yard. Then voices, closer now. A woman shouting. A man cursing. Feet hitting pavement fast. The side gate at the far end of the yard shook. All 3 of us turned. Open up, a man's voice shouted. Open the damn gate. I moved toward it, slow enough to think. Through the chain links, I saw 2 people in the next yard. A heavy-set man in a navy work jacket was bracing one hand on the fence while he yanked at the gate with the other. Behind him stood a woman in blue scrubs, breathing hard but steady, eyes moving everywhere at once. She was carrying a red first aid bag with the strap wrapped tight around her hand. Behind them, at the mouth of the side passage, another figure stumbled into view. Male. Mid-40s maybe. White t-shirt soaked dark at the sleeve. One hand clamped over his forearm. Please, the man at the gate said. He's with us. The woman in scrubs didn't say anything. She was looking at the injured arm. So was I. The man behind them stepped closer, and I got my first clear look at the wound. Teeth marks. Ragged and wet, already swollen around the edges. The woman met my eyes through the fence. Hers were sharp, tired, and already a step ahead of everyone else's. Don't open it, she said. The injured man's head snapped toward her. What? Don't, she said again, firmer this time. He's been bit. The heavy-set man turned. Angela, I saw the wound. Her voice stayed flat and controlled, which somehow made it worse. And I watched what happened 2 houses over. He's not coming inside until we know more. The injured man lurched toward the gate. It was one bite. That doesn't mean anything. But it did. I could see it in his face now. Sweat pouring off him, skin going pale under the panic. Eyes a little too bright. His free hand shaking so hard he had to grab the fence to steady himself. The older man beside me whispered, "Open it." The girl shook her head before I even could. The injured man saw that. Saw all of us looking at him and understanding the same thing at the same time. His voice changed. Lost the anger. Became raw. "Mike," he said, reading the name off a faded shipping label still stuck to a box by the porch. "Mike, please. I know you don't know me, but please. Don't leave me out here." That was the moment. Not the truck. Not the attack in the street. That. The second where the old world still expected the gate to open because somebody was scared and hurt and asking. I put my hand on the latch and kept it there. "I'm sorry," I said. He stared at me like he hadn't understood the words. Then his knees buckled for half a second. He caught himself on the fence, breathing in ugly little gasps. The woman, Angela, took one step back. The heavy-set man cursed under his breath and moved with her. The bitten man's mouth opened. Not to plead again. To make a sound that started like pain and ended somewhere else entirely. His fingers hooked through the chain link. His jaw clenched. His whole body jerked once, violently, and when he looked up at us again, whatever had still been human in his face was already going. The girl screamed. The older man stumbled back. The man in the work jacket just whispered, "Jesus." The bitten man slammed himself against the gate hard enough to rattle the whole fence. Then again. I backed away from the latch at last. Angela never took her eyes off him. "Now you know," she said quietly. "So decide fast. One house won't hold. We either build layers right now, or we die yard by yard." I looked past her at the line of connected fences, porches, and narrow strips of concrete running behind the block. She was right. This wasn't a house problem anymore. It was a neighborhood one. But the moment the gate stopped shaking, the entire area fell silent. Not actually silent. The city was still out there, unraveling second by second. Sirens blared and were abruptly silenced. A car horn moaned once in a dying fall. Distantly, I could hear the sound of shattering glass and a chorus of people screaming all at once. But in the tiny area of concrete and patchy grass contained by the fence, no one moved. The thing at the gate continued to hit it. Not to open it, not to try the latch, but to throw its weight against the gate over and over again. Jaw working, fingers scrabbling through the chain links toward us. It had been a person asking to be let in a few minutes before. Now it was a force. One more force trying to get through something designed to keep the peace inside and the trouble out. And that was when my brain suddenly latched on to the right problem. Not escape. Layout. I turned to Angela. "How many houses back along the fence?" She blinked once. She hadn't expected the question. Then she turned her gaze down the fence line. "On this side? 4. Maybe 5 if the corner house has a connection through the alley." The heavy-set man in the work jacket wiped the sweat from his face with a shaking hand. "My name is Ron. I'm 2 houses down. Garage out back. Tools. Chain. Power stuff. If the lights are on. Good. Useful." I turned to the older man standing next to me. "Can you walk?" "We need 3 houses minimum," I said. "Not to live in. To move through. 1 central, 1 fallback, 1 with roof access if we can get it. We keep the streets outside us, not under us." Angela looked at me for a second. "What do you do?" "Used to manage properties." She nodded once. That was enough. A crash came from the front of the house nearest us. Something heavy hit the wall. The city was moving into the backyards now. Ron pointed through the new opening. "My garage is in the next yard over. Detached. Metal door. No windows on the alley side." "Good," I said. "That's our supply point." I looked at all of them. From this second on, nobody runs into the street unless I say so. We move yard to yard. Quiet. Fast. We find the middle of this block, and we build from there. Another hit rattled the gate behind us. This time, nobody looked at it for long. We were already moving. We crossed 3 yards in under 2 minutes. That was the first lesson the back route taught me. Distance was different once you were off the street. What had appeared to be a solid block from the curb was a maze of shortcuts through narrow alleys between the houses. Fences, porches, small retaining walls between yards. A dozen garages and side doors left unlocked by people who imagined that the worst thing that could happen in Newark would be burglary. We were approaching the 4th yard when we picked up 2 more survivors. A man in his early 30s, Luis, with a claw hammer clutched in his hand as if he were unaware he was holding it. His wife Elena, and a small girl clinging to her leg as if she were glued to her. They had been hiding in a ground-floor laundry room with the lights off until they heard people tearing each other apart on the street 3 doors down. Luis did not trust me. Not initially. Elena trusted Angela less after Angela started asking her if she or her husband had been bitten. That was fine. Trust was a luxury problem. I only cared that they listened to me when I directed them to the central yard I had chosen, 2 houses in from the alley and halfway down the block. Brick row house. Steel security door on the back entrance. Narrow rear steps up to a 2nd-floor porch roof. Shared fence line with both yards. Detached garage in the back with enough cover around it to conceal movement from the alley. Not perfect. Good enough to live through the next hour. Inside house first, I said. Garage second. Roof if we have to move vertical. Luis looked at me like I'd started speaking another language. What we have to do is leave. Go where? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. Angela was checking Elena's hands, then the little girl's arms, quick and clinical, searching for blood, tears, bite marks. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was holding a stuffed rabbit by its ear and watching all of us with huge silent eyes. Ron rattled the garage handle, got it open, and gave a short nod. Tools. Fuel cans. Extension ladder. Better than I expected. Useful again. Good. I was about to assign the next job when something slammed against the alley-side garage door hard enough to dent the metal inward. Everyone flinched. A second hit came a breath later, followed by a scraping drag across the steel. Then a voice from beyond it, weak and ragged. Police, it said. Open up. We all froze. Angela turned to me. That could be a trap. From who? Ron muttered. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The infected didn't talk, not that I'd heard. But that didn't mean whoever was out there was safe. Another hit. Less force this time. Please. I stepped aside at the garage door, motioned for Ron to move to the opposite side, and began raising the latch an inch at a time. The door rolled up high enough for a man to collapse through. He landed on his shoulder, then rolled over onto his back with a groan that seemed to come from deep within him. Dark blue Newark police uniform. Vest half unstrapped. Blood on one leg. Service revolver still holstered, but askew. He looked to be between 40 and done. Ron pulled the door shut again. Angela knelt down beside him before any of the others did anything. Don't touch him, she said. Let me take a look. The man struggled to sit up and failed. Officer Ben Hollowell, he said. West Precinct. His eyes locked on mine. You people secure here? Secure enough to ask questions, I said. You bitten? No, he said. Angela opened her trauma shears and cut through his pant leg. Deep gash, she said. Not bitten. Looks like a piece of metal to me. He was pale. Crash? He nodded. Patrol car got pinned in. Crowd turned on us. Some crazy, some hysterical, some already. He stopped and looked around. This block's not so bad. Street fronts are out. Back routes are still clear. That caught my attention. How long you been out there? Since dawn, he said. The garage seemed to get smaller around us on his answer. Luis spoke up. Then tell me there's a way out. Ben made a laugh, but it held no humor. Only tiredness. Safe? No. He scanned each face as if he hated the words he was about to say. You want the truth? Dispatch went down in pieces. EMS stopped answering calls. Half the units were running bite calls before we realized what we were dealing with. And by mid-morning, all the streets I crossed were worse than the last. The room remained silent. I looked up at the ceiling of the garage, and then over at the extension ladder that rested against the wall, held in place by wall hooks. We need height. Ron looked over at me, and then over at the ladder. The roof, through the porch. In 5 minutes, I was standing on the roof of the second floor with Ben and Angela by my side, the wind biting between the houses. Newark looked like it was a city that had been interrupted mid-sentence. Smoke was rising from 3 directions. Cars were stopped at angles that made no sense. People running across streets that were clear, and people standing still where streets were jammed. Sirens. Fires. And through it all, figures moving the wrong way through intersections, around buses, between stopped vehicles, drawn toward movement like metal pulled to a magnet. No checkpoints. No signs of control. No line holding anywhere I could see. The city was not losing control. It was already lost. Ben leaned against the railing of the porch, his face pale. If you make it through this, don't turn this place into a prison. Everyone's instinct is to lock everything down. That's how you get yourself killed when the numbers start building. I looked down over the chain of backyards, the garages, the fences, the narrow spaces between houses. Then I looked farther out at the streets already filling with death. He was right. What we were building could not just be a shelter. It had to breathe. We came down off the porch roof with a plan, and less time than I wanted. That was the pattern of everything now. Learn one hard fact, and use it for maybe 5 minutes before the next fact was forced on you. I brought everybody together in the central yard behind the brick row house that I'd chosen as the anchor of our territory. It was small enough that it could be defended, connected enough that it could be used as a hub. To the rear of the group, Ron's garage was half hidden behind a leaning fence and the dead maple tree that had fallen against it. To the left of the group, 2 back doors led out into the adjoining properties. To the right, the concrete led to the alley. And above us, the porch roof was the entrance to the second-story fire escape and 2 more rooftops if we had to go up. I waved my hand as I talked, forcing myself to keep my voice flat and matter-of-fact. This isn't one safe house, I said. Forget that. One house catches on fire. One house gets breached. One house gets noisy and we die inside it. What we're creating is a territory. Outer edge. Middle line. Inner sanctuary. Luis looked as if he wanted to disagree, but Ben beat him to it. He was leaning on the porch post, one hand pressed against his leg. Angela was already opening her red bag on the back steps, sorting through what little she had. Then give people jobs before fear does it for you. So I did. Ron and I began with the fences. We chained the rear gates, not quite closed, just enough to slow anything from passing through while still allowing us to drop whatever it was quickly from our side. On the warped fence sections between yards, we marked 2 pass-through spots and 1 break spot at shoulder height in case we had to smash through a fence quickly. The detached garage became our tool station. Hammer, pry bar, extension cord, gaskin rope, duct tape, bolt cutters. Useful things. Real things. Things I understood. Luis and Elena worked on stockpiling bottled water, canned food, blankets, and a flashlight cache in the central kitchen. Angela set up the back dining room as a possible triage and quarantine area if we needed it. Ben sat at the table with a notebook and helped me draw a map of our block from memory. Which houses were occupied, which porches had good sight lines, which rooftops connected, which alley corners were blind. The little girl, Luis's daughter Sophia, sat on the back steps with her stuffed rabbit and watched us rebuild her world with chain, wood, and fear. By noon, our zone had shape. The cars on the side street stayed where they were, but I dragged trash cans and a broken grill across one cut-through to bend the approach inward. Not a wall. A funnel. We covered the lower windows facing the street, cleared loose junk from the yards so nobody would trip running at night. We set one ladder from Ron's garage up to the porch roof and laid another flat under the fence line where only we would know to grab it. Angela noticed what I was doing with the cars when she stepped outside to wash blood from her hands. "You're leaving gaps," she said. "On purpose. Most people would block everything. Most people are trying to feel safe," I said. "I'm trying not to get us trapped." She looked at the angled lane I had left between the parked sedan and the stack of trash barrels. "You really did manage properties. Facilities. Housing maintenance. Locks, boilers, busted pipes. Tenants who swore they only called me after things got bad." She gave a faint smile. "And now?" I looked at the yard, the fences, the roofline, the people moving because I told them to move. "Now I'm trying to stop the whole block from turning into a coffin." I had barely finished saying that when the screaming started. A woman's voice. "Mid-block. Front street, maybe one house over." Everyone froze. Then she came bursting through the side passage between the neighboring houses, wild-eyed and half-running, half-falling toward us. Mid-30s maybe. Bare feet. Sweat-soaked hair stuck to her face. Behind her came 2 infected at a full sprint, faster than anything moving that wrong should be able to move. "Open it," she screamed. "Please, please." She slammed into the outer gate and shook it so hard the chain snapped tight. Luis stepped forward on instinct. I grabbed his shoulder and yanked him back. "No. She's alive. And if we open that blind, all 3 will come through." The woman clutched the gate, sobbing. One of the infected was almost on top of her. Angela grabbed the pry bar from the steps. Ron raised his hammer. Ben pushed himself off the porch rail, pain written across his face. There was no time. I saw the line instantly. Outer gate. Narrow run. Second gate. Central yard. If we opened the first and let panic decide the rest, the entire zone would collapse before it ever truly existed. Middle yard, I snapped. With me. Ron, second gate. "Luis, hold your family back." Then I moved. I hit the first gate just as the woman went down to one knee. Not because she'd been grabbed. Because panic had finally broken her legs out from under her. She was still clawing at the chain, still trying to pull herself through gaps too small for a hand, let alone a body. One of the infected slammed into the fence behind her hard enough to make the whole post jump. Its fingers hooked through the link's inches from her shoulder. Angela came up on my left with the pry bar raised. "Open and pull," she said. "Not all the way." I slipped the chain loose just enough to drag the gate inward a foot. The woman saw the opening and tried to throw herself through it all at once. I caught her under the arms and hauled her sideways instead of straight in, wrenching her off balance and clear of the infected reaching through. Angela stepped into the gap and swung. The pry bar hit the first infected across the temple with a crack like a bat on wet lumber. It stumbled but didn't drop. She hit it again, lower this time, and it folded hard against the fence. The second one was already coming through the passage. Ron appeared at the inner gate with the hammer in both hands. Move. I dragged the woman backwards into the middle yard as Angela continued to back away one step at a time, keeping the outer gate between her and the thing that was still trying to push its way through. Ron opened the inner gate just far enough for us to slip through, and then kicked it shut behind us. The woman fell to the concrete and was sobbing uncontrollably. She could not speak. Luis was halfway to her before my arm went out across his chest. Nobody touches her yet. He looked at me. She's not one of them. Not the point. Angela came through last, breathing hard. She dropped the bar and knelt beside the woman, checking her quickly. Hands. Forearms. Neck. Face. She pulled the woman's sweatshirt sleeve up. No bite. Other arm. Nothing. She checked the back of the woman's leg where the fabric was torn. Clean. For now. What's your name? The woman swallowed hard. Danielle. Were you grabbed? No. Were you bitten? No. Was anyone bleeding on you? The woman hesitated just a fraction of a second too long, and every muscle in the yard tightened. Answer me. A little. I don't know. I was running. That was enough. Luis let out a hard breath through his nose. We can't leave her out there. I'm not, I said. The woman looked up at me from the concrete. Mascara ran down her cheeks. Her chest was rising and falling too fast. Please don't send me back. I looked at the inner kitchen door, then the garage, then the narrow strip of yard between the two fence lines. If she was clean, bringing her straight into the center of the zone would be stupid. If she wasn't, we'd all pay for trying to be merciful. I pointed to the side patio between the two yards. Covered awning. One chair. Lock gate on either end. Enough room to watch someone without giving them access to everyone else. Quarantine there, I said. Luis shook his head. She just almost died. And if she turns in our kitchen, then what? He had no answer. Ben did. From the porch, his voice rough with pain. Distance buys truth. Truth keeps people alive. Angela helped Danielle to her feet and guided her toward the patio. Not gently, not harshly. Professionally. Ron brought over a bottle of water and set it down just inside the boundary without stepping across it. Night was coming fast now. The light in the yard had turned flat and gray. Beyond the fences, the city kept making sounds I had never heard before and hoped I would never hear again. The outer gate still shuddered once in a while when something struck it from the passage. I looked at the people in front of me. More than we had an hour ago. More frightened. More dependent. More dangerous to each other simply because we were all trapped close together. We had wanted a community. What we had instead was something harder. A perimeter with rules. And the first rule I was learning was that letting people in wasn't a moment. It was a process. By the time morning rolled around, it had a shape to it. Not a safe shape. Not a shape I would have trusted for longer than a few hours. But it was more than panic. More than people huddled behind locked doors and hoping that the worst would pass them by. We had our watch points. We had our routes. We had our rules. And outside all of that, the city was getting worse. I was up before the sun, standing on the second-floor porch roof, with cold air cutting through my jacket and both hands gripping a pair of cheap binoculars I'd found in Ron's garage. The sky over Newark had turned the color of dirty steel. Down on the main street, abandoned cars sat nose to tail, some with doors hanging open, some with dark stains dried along the panels. A city bus still blocked the far intersection. Whatever had happened there overnight had ended with shattered glass and nobody left inside. Movement drifted between the vehicles. More of them than yesterday. Not running. Not organized. Just wandering in that same ugly, aimless way they moved until something alive gave them a reason to focus. A man in a torn puffer jacket bumped into a stopped sedan, corrected himself, then kept moving. A woman wearing one hospital sock and one bare foot turned slowly in the middle of the road, like she had forgotten how her body worked. Farther down, 3 more stood clustered around something on the pavement that I didn't want to look at too closely. The block wasn't invisible anymore. That was the problem. A quiet pocket of living people in a dead neighborhood had a way of becoming visible even when nobody meant for it to. Ben climbed onto the roof behind me one careful step at a time, his jaw tight against the pain in his leg. You should be resting, I said without turning. You should too. Fair enough. He stopped beside me and followed my gaze down the street. They're thicker on the outer corners. I saw. Means the open routes are narrowing. I lowered the binoculars. Means pressure's building. Below us, Ron was already in the middle yard with a coil of chain over one shoulder, muttering under his breath while he reinforced the weak side gate near the alley run. Angela had set up a makeshift treatment station at the dining room table and was rechecking Ben's bandage with an expression that told me she didn't like what she was seeing. Luis was carrying canned food from one house to another, while Elena tried to keep Sophia busy with crayons and notebook paper like the world outside the fences hadn't fallen apart. It looked almost organized. That scared me more than the chaos had, because organized made people comfortable. Comfortable made people careless. By 8, the small weaknesses started showing themselves. A loose latch on the rear fence of the empty house to our left. A broken front window across the lane that gave too clear a sight line into the middle room. A dog barking somewhere 2 blocks away without stopping. And worst of all, a car alarm chirping weakly every time the wind shifted enough to rock a dented hatchback near the curb. Each one small. Each one the kind of thing that could get us killed. Ron and I spent the next 2 hours moving through the zone like maintenance men working on a dying machine. Tighten this. Cover that. Rechain the side gate. Tape blankets over broken glass. Wedge a trash can under the hatchback's bumper so the frame stopped shifting. Practical work. My hands understood it even when the rest of me didn't. But practical work didn't solve the deeper problem. By noon, Ben's fever had climbed. Angela checked his wound again, and this time she didn't bother hiding her reaction from me. Infection, she said quietly once we were alone in the kitchen. Not from a bite. From the leg. He needs antibiotics, proper cleaning supplies, maybe stronger pain meds than what I've got in the bag. How long? She looked toward the dining room where Ben sat pretending not to listen. A day or 2 before this gets bad. Maybe less. Luis walked in halfway through that conversation carrying 2 cans of peaches and a box of crackers like proof against the end of the world. Food's not great either, he said. Sophia can eat canned stuff for a while, but not like this forever. Batteries are low. Water's fine for now. Everything else. He shook his head. This block holds. It doesn't last. There it was. The truth underneath all the work. The defense zone was doing what I built it to do. It was keeping us alive today. But it wasn't enough to carry us through what came after today. I looked out the covered back window toward the fences, the garage, the alley spine I had worked so hard to preserve. We're not a final stop, I said. Angela folded her arms. Then what are we? I thought about the infected gathering thicker along the edges of the street. About Ben's leg. About the little girl drawing rabbits at the table while the city rotted around her. A breathing space, I said. Long enough to plan the next move. That afternoon, I finally drew the block the way I'd been seeing it in my head. Not as houses. Not as addresses. As a machine that could fail. Ben had drawn the basic layout on the back of a takeout menu, but I laid it flat on the dining room table and started marking it properly with a thick black marker from Sophia's coloring set. 3-row houses in our control. 2 usable rear yards. Ron's garage. 1 side alley. 1 half-block stretch of front street we could watch but never control. The corner bodega outside our reach. The church lot at the far end. Broken vehicles. Fence lines. Roof access. Blind angles. Then I marked the dangerous part. The routes we had already started trusting too much. Luis leaned over my shoulder. What are the excess? Places we die if we pretend they're better than they are. He didn't like that answer. Neither did I. Angela stood by the sink cleaning blood off a pair of trauma shears. You've been thinking about this since yesterday. Since the porch roof, I said. Because once I had looked over the city from above, I couldn't stop seeing the block as part of something bigger. Streets clogged. Sightlines cut off. Infected drifting until noise or motion gave them direction. The more we secured our small piece of ground, the more obvious the danger became. Everyone's first instinct in a situation like this is to seal everything. Board the windows. Jam the gates. Stack furniture against doors. Turn one house into a bunker and hope the walls hold. That works right up until the moment you need to leave. I tapped the map with the marker. If we close this alley completely, we're safer for maybe half a day. If numbers build on the street side after that, this whole zone turns into a pocket. No clean exit. No resupply. Nowhere to fall back. Ron walked in from the yard wiping grease off his hands with a rag. Then we keep the alley. We keep part of it, I said. Controlled. Not open. Ben shifted in his chair, pale and sweating, but still paying attention like a man who refused to stop being useful just because his body was giving out. Defense in layers. Not walls. Filters. Exactly. Luis stared at the map. You're talking about giving ground before we've even lost it. Yes. He looked up at me sharply. These are people's homes. I know what they are. Do you? The room went quiet. Sophia was in the next room with Elena, quiet for once, and through the back wall I could hear Ron's loose chain clinking in the yard whenever the wind nudged it. Outside the covered windows, something bumped a trash bin 2 houses over and kept moving. Luis planted one hand on the table. My daughter is sleeping here. My wife is finally breathing without shaking every few seconds. And you're telling me we might abandon part of it already. I'm telling you that if we love the wrong ground too much, it buries us. The words came out harder than I intended. Luis stepped back like I had pushed him. Angela broke the silence first. He's right. Luis turned toward her. Of course you'd say that. No, she said, her voice flat. I'm saying what keeps your little girl alive. Those are not always the same thing. That ended the argument, but it didn't settle it. I went back to the map. The house on the eastern edge had to go. Too exposed to the front street. Too many windows. Fence line too weak. Worst of all, holding it forced us to defend a shape that narrowed instead of breathing. It made the zone look bigger, but it actually cut our flexibility in half. I circled it once with the marker. Ron saw where I was looking and muttered, Mrs. Carter's place. I nodded. The name hung in the air for a moment. Mrs. Carter had been brought inside just before sunset the day before, along with Danielle and the others. 70 if she was a day. Arthritic hands. Still wearing a church cardigan when the world ended. She had spent most of the morning in the back room silent and stunned. Now I was drawing a line through her house like it was a failed support beam. I found her sitting on the sofa with a blanket across her knees. She looked up when I walked in. You have that face. What face? The one men get when they're about to tell you something you already know. I almost smiled. Almost. I crouched so I wouldn't have to talk down to her. Your house is too far out on the edge. If we keep trying to hold it, the defense line stretches too thin. We need to pull anything useful out and move the defense inward. Mrs. Carter listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned her head toward the curtained front window, like she could still see the living room exactly as it had been the morning before. My husband laid that tile himself, she said. I didn't answer. There was nothing useful to say. After a moment, she nodded once. Then take what matters. We spent the next hour stripping the edge house of anything worth carrying. Food. Blankets. 2 lamps. Batteries. A locking medicine box from the bathroom. A heavy oak dresser pushed across the inner hall to slow anything that came through later. Ron emptied the back shed of tools and coiled hose. Angela gathered over-the-counter medicine and bandages. Luis carried boxes without looking at me. When the place was empty enough, I chained the rear gate halfway and left the front of the house as dark and lifeless as I could make it. Not defended. Not inviting. Just another hollow shell on a dying block. Back in the central yard, I updated the map. Outer warning line. Middle defense line. Inner shelter. Escape spine. Backyard to garage. Garage to side alley to secondary street if the main block went bad. Roof route, emergency only. Ben studied it for a long time, then gave a tired nod. That'll last longer. I looked past him through the kitchen window toward the fences and rooftops and the narrow passageways that now mattered more than walls. We had a smarter zone now. Smaller, harsher, and more honest than it had been that morning. We weren't building something permanent. We were building something that could let us leave before permanence killed us. By the time late afternoon rolled around, the whole block felt tighter. Not smaller exactly. Tighter. Like every fence, every porch, every parked car was holding its breath with us. We had made the defense zone smarter by pulling inward, but smart didn't mean comfortable. Smart meant the map in my head had fewer lies in it. It meant I knew exactly how little margin we had. Ben's condition made that impossible to ignore. Angela changed his bandage again at the dining room table, while the rest of us pretended not to watch. The smell came before the words did. Not rot yet, but close enough to make my stomach tighten. The cut on his calf had turned an angry red around the edges. The skin was swollen and hot, and the drainage was darker than it had been that morning. Angela cleaned it as gently as she could. Ben gripped the chair hard enough to whiten his knuckles and made only one low sound in the back of his throat. When she finished, she stepped into the kitchen and washed her hands longer than necessary. How bad? I asked. She dried her hands on a dish towel without looking at me. Bad enough that if we had a clinic 5 minutes away and a normal world outside, I would still be worried. That's not an answer. It's the one I've got. She finally met my eyes. He needs antibiotics. Real ones. More sterile dressing. Better pain control. Maybe saline if we can find it. I can slow this. I can't stop it with what's in that bag. I looked through the doorway. Ben sat slumped in the chair, face gray with sweat, one hand resting near the pistol on the table out of habit more than anything else. He caught me looking and gave a tired shrug, like he already knew what the conversation had been. Luis walked in from the yard carrying a half-empty crate of canned goods. Food count is worse than I thought, he said. Enough to survive, sure. Not enough for this many people, if we're talking more than a few days. And Sophia is down to the last of the juice boxes. In the next room, Elena tried to keep her voice light while she read from an old picture book. Sophia laughed once at something on the page, quick and small, and so normal it almost felt wrong. I leaned both hands on the kitchen counter. Medicine. Food. Batteries low. No reliable news. And outside our carefully layered little zone, a city full of things that would tear us apart if we got careless. We need a supply point, I said. Angela folded her arms. Not the bodega. Too exposed. Agreed. Ron came through the back door just in time to hear that. He wiped dirt off his forearms with a rag. There's a small pharmacy strip on the next secondary road over. Used to be a dental office, laundromat, and a pharmacy tucked at the end. About 3 blocks if you walk the street. 2 if you cut yard to yard and through the alley line. Ben looked up from the table. Still too far if you make noise. Everything is too far if we make noise, I said. That quieted the room. I grabbed the map from the table and spread it open again. Ron stepped beside me and started pointing with the rag in his hand. This is us, he said. This side alley runs north, cuts behind the empty duplex, then dead ends at a chain gate. Gate opens to the service lane behind the pharmacy strip. Problem is the lane narrows here. He tapped a bend between a garage wall and a dumpster enclosure. Blind corner. Bad if something's waiting. Any other approach? Angela asked. Street front, Ron said, which is another way of saying no. Ben shifted carefully in his chair. You want short exposure, controlled entry, fast exit. Don't shop. Don't wander. Go with a list. Hit one objective. Luis set the crate down harder than he meant to. Or we don't go at all. We stay put and wait one more day. For what? Angela asked. Not cruel. Not loud. Just direct. For his leg to get worse. For the food to stretch itself. For the block to become easier to leave. Luis opened his mouth, then closed it. I understood why he wanted to argue. I wanted to argue too. The defense zone had only just begun to feel like something we could trust. The idea of stepping outside it on purpose felt like cutting a hole in the only thing keeping us alive. But that was the trick of places like this. You start mistaking temporary shelter for strategy. I studied the map until the route stopped being lines and started becoming movement in my head. Out through the inner yard. Across Ron's garage. Side alley north. Pause at the chain gate. Service lane. Pharmacy back in trance if it existed. Side glass if it didn't. Fast in. Take only what mattered. Back the same way. No extra risks. No second stop. I go, I said. Angela nodded immediately. I'm coming. I know what to take. Luis stepped forward. Then I'm going too. No, I said. His jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that alone. I do if I'm the one building the route. I kept my voice level. You stay because your wife and little girl need one parent here if this goes bad. And because if we don't make it back, someone needs to understand the zone well enough to keep it alive. He hated that because he knew it made sense. Ron looked down at the map again. If you go tomorrow, maybe the lane stays clear. If you wait too long, things drift. One bad cluster in that bend, and the route is useless. That was the part that got me. Not fear. Timing. Every survival decision since yesterday had come down to timing windows opening and closing before we were ready for them. I marked the pharmacy with a thick black X. Then I marked the alley route. Then the fallback. We prep tonight, I said. List only. Antibiotics, dressings, saline, pain meds, batteries if there's anything we can carry without wasting time. Light tools. Quiet entry. Angela nodded. Ben closed his eyes for a second, either from pain or relief. I couldn't tell which. Ron started mentally listing what we would need. Luis stared at the map like he wanted to burn the route out of it. Then, from outside, came the sound of metal rattling in the alley. Not close, but close enough. Everyone in the kitchen turned toward the back door. Another rattle, then a scrape, then silence. The route we were counting on was changing already. I looked at Ron. He looked at me, and without either of us saying it, I knew the supply run had just become something else. Ron and I checked the alley before sundown. Not from the gate. Not stupid enough for that. We went in through Mrs. Carter's abandoned second floor, crossed the porch roof, then climbed onto the low garage line, where we could look down the service cut without silhouetting ourselves against the sky. The alley route had changed exactly the way I was afraid it would. What had been a narrow but workable retreat line that morning was now half-choked with bodies. Not dead bodies. Not entirely. 3 infected drifted in the service lane near the chain gate, bumping into the fence and dumpster enclosure in slow, uneven loops. 2 more stood farther back near the loading doors behind the pharmacy strip, swaying like drunks with their heads tilted at angles that made my neck hurt just looking at them. And at the bend Ron had marked on the map, the one place where the lane narrowed between brick and metal, an overturned trash container had spilled black bags, broken glass, and loose cardboard across half the path. No clean movement. No clean fallback. If Angela and I went for supplies tomorrow without fixing that first, the defense zone stopped being a defense zone the second we stepped outside it. Ron lay flat beside me on the roofline, looking through the gap between 2 chimney stacks. Told you that corner was bad. Yeah, that's a lot of noise if we clear it wrong. I kept watching the infected below. Then we don't clear it wrong. Back in the kitchen, I spread the map out again and changed the plan. Angela came in first, wiping her hands on her jeans. You have that face again. The run's off, I said. Luis looked up too quickly from the battery lantern he was checking. Good. For supplies, I said. Not for movement. That killed the relief in the room immediately. I pointed to the marked alley line. The pharmacy can wait another day if it has to. The route can't. If that lane seals up, this whole block becomes exactly what we said it couldn't become. Ben was pale enough now that his freckles stood out sharply across his nose, but his eyes stayed fixed on the map. Primary objective changed. Reopen mobility. Angela nodded first. And if we find supplies while we're doing it, we take what's there, I said. But we don't chase it. Ron rubbed a hand across his mouth. Tools then. Quiet ones. We moved just before dawn. It was the compromise between darkness and visibility. Enough gray light to see where you were putting your feet, not enough to wake the entire dead city if you were careful. Angela came with me because if the pharmacy back door happened to be reachable once the lane was open, we would need her to identify whatever medicine was left. Ron came because the route itself was the mission, and nobody on the block understood metal, locks, and jammed access better than he did. Luis hated staying behind, but he stayed. That mattered more than him agreeing. We went out through the garage, under the half-lifted service door, and into air cold enough to make every breath sound too loud. The alley smelled like wet brick, engine oil, and the sweet rot that had settled over everything in the last 2 days. 3 infected at the chain gate, 1 facing away, 2 drifting side to side. Angela touched my sleeve, pointed low, then counted with her fingers. I nodded. No guns. Ron carried a short pry bar and bolt cutters. Angela had a hammer from the garage with a strip of towel wrapped around the handle so it wouldn't slip. I had a long kitchen knife taped tight at the grip and 1 heavy wrench through my belt. Ugly tools. Good enough. We took the first 2 quickly. Angela moved on the left one while I closed on the other. Up close they looked worse than from a distance. Skin gray in patches. Blood dried black around the mouth. Eyes still tracking movement with that terrible empty precision. Mine turned at the last second, mouth opening, and I drove the wrench into the side of its skull with everything I had. The impact shot pain up my arm to my shoulder. It collapsed against the fence, twitching, and I hit it again until it stopped moving. Angela's target dropped under two brutal swings, no wasted motion. The third one hurt enough to turn. Ron didn't wait for it to reach us. He stepped forward and jammed the pry bar under its jaw, then shoved upward with a grunt that lifted it off balance long enough for me to drive it backward into the brick wall. Its head cracked once against the mortar. Then it stopped moving. No one spoke. Talking made it real in the wrong way. Ron moved straight to the chain gate, hands already working. Cut or unlock? Quietest. Unlock then. The padlock was old and stiff with rust. He sprayed it with garage lubricant from a small can and worked the key ring he had built from scavenged house keys and lock picks. 20 seconds. 30. Too long. My pulse hammered in my throat. Then the shackle popped. We opened the gate just wide enough to slip through. That was when the bend became the real problem. The overturned trash container had wedged itself across the narrowest part of the lane, forcing anyone passing through to brush close to the brick wall on one side and the steel service doors on the other. A terrible place to run. An even worse place to fight. Broken bottles glittered in the dim light. One black bag had split open, spilling rotten produce and something chemical smelling across the path. Angela crouched near the mess and pointed ahead. Two more infected stood near the pharmacy rear steps. Not wandering now. Listening. I could feel the whole lane balanced on a knife edge. One wrong scrape. One dropped tool. One slammed door. And everything around us would know exactly where to come. I glanced back toward home, toward the invisible chain of yards and fences that only mattered if this passage stayed open. Then I looked at the narrow lane ahead. We clear the path first, I whispered. Then we breathe. We couldn't clear the whole lane. That was the first thing I realized when I stepped up to the overturned trash container and put both hands on the slick plastic edge. Even empty, it would have scraped too loudly across the pavement. Half full of soaked cardboard, broken glass, and whatever had burst inside the black bags, it might as well have been bolted to the ground. So we stopped trying to fix the whole problem. We fixed the part that mattered. Ron crouched beside me, eyes moving from the dumpster enclosure to the brick wall to the two infected near the pharmacy steps. If we tip it farther, he whispered, we open maybe 18 inches. Enough. For one at a time. Fast. Angela stood watch behind us, hammer low in one hand, her head turning in quick, efficient movements. Then do it before those two drift closer. Ron and I braced and pushed together. Not to move the container away, but to roll it a few inches farther onto its damaged side. The plastic groaned. A bottle snapped under the wheel. Both infected near the steps twitched toward the sound. I froze. One of them, a woman maybe, gray cardigan hanging off one shoulder, started down the lane with that stiff, unnatural gait that always looked slow until suddenly it wasn't. Angela met it halfway. No warning. No hesitation. She stepped inside its reach and swung the hammer into the side of its head. The blow slammed it against the steel service door hard enough to dent the panel. Before it could slide down, she hit it again under the temple. It collapsed against the wall, fingers scraping uselessly along the concrete. The second infected jerked toward us. I went for it before it could make noise. 3 fast steps, wrench already raised, then a hard strike that glanced off the forehead and sent pain shooting through my wrist. Not enough. It lunged at me blindly, hands grabbing for my jacket. I drove my shoulder into its chest, slammed it back against the pharmacy steps, and hit again, this time behind the ear. Bone gave way. The body folded and dropped still. For a moment the lane went silent except for our breathing. Then Ron whispered sharply, "Gap's open." He was right. By rolling the container farther onto its side, we had forced a narrow path between the broken brick wall and the dented plastic. Tight, filthy, and dangerous if we ever had to run through it, but open. Not perfect. Alive was the goal, not perfect. Angela crouched by the pharmacy rear door and tested the handle. Locked. She checked the frame, the hinges, the wired glass pane set high in the door. "Can you get it?" I asked. Ron leaned close, studying the lock. "Maybe." "Quietly?" "No." Angela looked back at me. Then we don't push it. It stung to hear that. Medicine was 5 feet away. Maybe less. Ben's leg, batteries, dressings, everything we needed might have been sitting right behind that door. But she was right. The lane was our lifeline. We hadn't come out here to lose it, because hope made us greedy. I nodded once. Then we marked the door and go. Ron tore a strip from a red shop rag and tied it low around the rear handrail by the steps, visible only if you were already in the lane and knew to look. Our marker. Our reminder. Our chance later if the route stayed usable long enough. Then the sound came from behind us. Metal rattling. Not the chain gate. Farther back. Closer to home. Angela straightened immediately. How many? I turned toward the mouth of the service lane where it met the side alley. Not one or two. More. Shapes moving through the gray morning, drawn by the little sounds we had tried so hard to keep contained. A man in a torn mechanic's shirt. A woman with one arm hanging loose at the elbow. Another shape behind them. Then another. Enough, I said. Ron was already backing toward the gap we had opened. Then we move now. We slipped through one at a time, shoulders scraping brick and slick plastic, boots crunching broken glass no matter how careful we tried to be. That was enough. The nearest infected quickened, heads lifting, mouths opening. By the time I cleared the gap, 6 were in the lane behind us and more turning into it. Gate, I said. We ran. Not blind panic. Controlled speed. Fast enough to escape, slow enough to see our footing. Angela in front. Ron in the middle. I stayed at the back counting what followed. 8 now. Maybe 9. Too many for silence. Too close for comfort. Angela reached the chain gate first and pulled it open. Ron slipped through. I followed and slammed it shut as the first infected lunged for the gap. The metal rang through the alley. One arm pushed between the links before I could drag the chain across. I brought the wrench down hard enough to snap the wrist backward. The hand dropped away. Ron looped the chain twice and shoved the lock through on pure speed. It clicked shut just as the first body hit the fence. Then they all did. The chain link bowed under the weight. Fingers pushed through. Teeth snapped at empty air. One started climbing, not thinking, just pushing higher because bodies behind forced it upward. We're not done, Angela said. She was right. The alley leading back to the garage had become a funnel, exactly like the ones I had built inside the zone. Only now we were on the wrong side of it. Another sound carried through the noise of the infected. Shouting. Luis. Then Ron's garage door rattling open from inside. He and Elena were waiting when we reached it. Luis held a shovel in both hands, his face white with adrenaline. Elena stood behind him with one arm wrapped around Sophia, so tight it looked painful. Ben wasn't there, but I knew where he was. Probably trying to stand, when he had no business standing. Luis shouted. We ducked under the half-raised garage door and stumbled inside. Ron and Luis dragged it down the moment my boots cleared the threshold. Bodies slammed into the metal from outside hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Sophia cried out once. Elena held her tighter. Angela stood with the hammer raised, breathing hard. Ron dropped the lock bar into place. The impacts continued. 5 seconds. Then 10. Then they began to drift away, some of them losing the exact source of what had drawn them. I bent forward with both hands on my knees, pulling air into my lungs so hard it hurt. Luis looked at me. Did you get the supplies? No. His face fell. I straightened slowly. We got something better. The route's open. He looked ready to argue, but the pounding on the garage door cut him off. That was the lesson landing. The block didn't survive because we brought medicine home. The block survived because home still had a way to breathe. By midday the pressure shifted to the front side of the zone. Maybe the noise from the alley pulled some of them in. Maybe the city itself was pushing bodies through the outer streets in ways we couldn't track. Whatever the cause, the largest group yet gathered along the old eastern edge near the abandoned house. Not a solid wall. Worse than that, a loose mass that kept finding weak points and pressing them. The first real siege. Every decision from the last 2 days suddenly mattered. Luis went to the porch roof lookout. Angela took the middle yard gate. Ron reinforced the garage line and kept ladders ready in case we had to go vertical. Elena moved Sophia and Mrs. Carter into the inner kitchen with clear orders. 1 bag each, shoes on, run if I yelled. Ben dragged himself to the dining room window with the map and started calling what he heard before the rest of us did. Left fence pressure. Front lane movement. East side trash funnel failing. The zone bent. That was why it survived. When the abandoned edge house finally gave us what it had been threatening all day, a shattered front window and 3 infected forcing through the dark living room, we were already gone from that line. We shed the space exactly the way I had planned. Ugly. Painful. Effective. Angela dropped one at the side passage with the hammer. Luis shouted from the porch roof that 2 more were angling toward the middle gate instead of the inner house because the parked sedan and trash barrels were bending their path exactly as intended. Ron kicked open the low fence gap between yards and yelled, "Fall back now. Not retreat. Fall back." There is a difference. We gave ground without breaking. From outer line to middle. From middle to inner. Each time pressure rose, the zone changed shape instead of cracking. A barricade near the detached shed failed early, just as I feared it might, but because the whole block had never depended on one perfect wall, its failure hurt us without ending us. At one point, Danielle froze in the yard holding a box of bandages, while an infected forced through the hedge break 30 feet away. Angela didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply crossed the yard, shoved Danielle toward the inner door, and dropped the infected with brutal swings. Dawn found us still breathing. The cluster on the east side thinned and drifted away once the pressure stopped paying off. The block looked wrecked in places. One fence down. The abandoned house fully lost. Blood across the side passage concrete. Everyone exhausted beyond words. But we were still mobile. Still inside our system. Still not trapped. I stood in the middle yard as morning light turned the broken glass pale around my boots, and finally understood what I had been trying to build since the first gate latched 2 days earlier. A defense zone doesn't survive because it believes it can never be breached. It survives because it knows exactly how to bend before it breaks.